Where is Black history? In your kitchen?
You don't have to be Black or African American to do soul food.
Can you find Black history on a busy sidewalk? Or at a famous stable?
African American jockeys won something like 11 of the first 13 Kentucky Derbies. They were phenomenal riders.
Maybe Black history is down the street.
By 1950, the California Eagle, an African-American owned newspaper, called Central Avenue the Black Belt of Los Angeles.
A lot of the history that we are highlighting here, they can find in their own backyard.
Washingtonians can spend a lifetime visiting memorials and museums on the National Mall. But some of the richest history of our town may be a little less white marble and a little more out of the way. Hi, I'm your host, Robin Hamilton, and if you are searching for Black history, it turns out you don't have to look that far. It may just be right here in your own backyard. In D.C., few people probably pay attention when they hustle along the busy U Street corridor. Once the center of Black life in Washington, these few city blocks can claim an amazing past. So follow along as we time travel down its sidewalks.
U Street and the area of D.C. called Shaw literally drips with African American history. Not only did it become a place of accomplished people to live, but it also became a mecca for business. We have nightlife, we have barbershops, billiard parlors. When U Street was in its heyday, these were places where Black people could go and be respected for who they were, not have Jim Crow tossed at them.
Not too far down the street and around a corner at 7th and T, you can find the historic Howard Theater, now restored to its former glory. Opened in 1912, it was America's first all-Black theater, and local stars like Duke Ellington, who lived over on 12th Street, could walk to work. All the greats like Cab Calloway, Louis Armstrong, and Pearl Bailey entertain patrons here.
It is clear, I think, that lack of opportunity in other parts of the city made people naturally gravitate here. But I time it from large numbers of Black folk arriving in this area from the Civil War.
During the Civil War, Washington, D.C. was the most heavily fortified city in the world. More than 68 forts protected the city and the Union government.
We have Camp Barker, which will be a freedom-seeking camp. So as Black people come into this area, which by the time, when they first get here, this is meadow, this is pasture.
The only camp in the U Street community, Barker became home to 4,000 men. Labeled contraband, Blacks served as support for white soldiers.
So they worked at Union forts. They did everything that they could. Many found it difficult to adjust, but they made and built the makings of a community that still doggedly hangs on even down to the 21st century.
As the neighborhood grew, banks and other important institutions sprang up to help establish a vibrant neighborhood.
We'd have True Reformers Hall at 12th and U, still there today, which was a seedbed of African American business. We'd have Bohemian Caverns or the Crystal Caverns, a top flight music spot. This is a working class neighborhood, but where Black men and women of note also lived. U Street was all these things and more. We're also a community that did not start out African American, but became one, and that's LaDroit Park. And we have a number of luminaries, Black educators, doctors, judges lived in LaDroit Park.
Today, U Street thrives as a cultural touchstone and a tourist destination, but gentrification has its downside.
The sharp decline is a combination of rising housing prices, city policy that did not do African Americans well, and a sense of loss of a culture. This is why it's important to keep that culture and that history alive in terms of monuments and memorials.
When In Your Own Backyard continues, a tale of two cities. Discover the unsung founder of Chicago.
Without him coming into the region and setting up the very first permanent settlement, what would have been here?
And cruise along the Black Belt of Los Angeles.
It was called the Apollo of the West. It had many greats perform there.
Sometimes we buzz right by the Black history in our own backyard, like this bust on Chicago's busy Michigan Avenue. Every year, millions of people walk by without a second glance, never learning about the most important person in the Windy City's past, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable.
Du Sable definitely has left an indelible mark on the city of Chicago.
Here at the museum that bears his name, Erica Griffin works as the education director.
This interactive kiosk gives us a glimpse into the Great Migration time period in the United States.
She says for the longest time, Du Sable was overlooked in the history books.
The origin of the city of Chicago had been credited to John Kinsey for quite some time. People have known about Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable and his impact for centuries. However, it really wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th century that African-American Chicagoans began to sort of push for a shift in the narrative.
Here we are, folks, at Chicago's world-famed Century of Progress.
In 1933, Chicago proudly unveiled its spectacular vision of the future. And in a salute to its past, it was here at the World's Fair that Du Sable was officially recognized as the city's founding father. Among the many exhibitions you could tour was a replica of his original cabin. Before his arrival on the shores of Lake Michigan, not much is known about Du Sable. Most likely born in Haiti of an African mother and French father, he developed skills that would prove useful in forging his new world.
Du Sable had this massive farm complex with the trading post, and on that land he had several different operations. So he was, of course, a fur trader. He was well educated. We know that he was charismatic, and we know that he picked up, I believe, 5 different languages, and because of that he was able to communicate with lots of different populations, all of which helped in his business transactions. Chicago truly is a success story because of its landscape, and the key component of the success, I have to say, is our access to the waterways. We can go up to the Great Lakes, find our way to Canada. We can go through the Chicago portage system and end up on the Mississippi River. If you think about Chicago today, it's hard to imagine just what it looked like when Du Sable first laid eyes on the landscape. So the area was a complete prairie land. You had a sort of a marshy lowland, but Du Sable said, I can take this land and turn it into something amazing, and that's exactly what he did. I think the most important thing to know about Du Sable and the founding of Chicago is that he truly was the start. Without him coming into the region and setting up the very first permanent settlement, what would have been here? His entrepreneurial mind definitely left a mark on this city, and we see it all around us.
From the shores of Lake Michigan, next, we go west to check out Black Los Angeles. And while Washington's Shaw neighborhood may be a long way from LA, we found out that in many ways, their Central Avenue proves to be a mirror image of DC's U Street, with some surprising similarities you might never guess. Back before there was a Los Angeles, Southern California was claimed by the Spanish. But according to Delilah Beasley and her book, The Negro Trailblazers of California, nearly half of the founders of the City of Angels were of African American descent.
A little small secret that many people don't know, but when they find out this information, you can see the melting pot of Los Angeles and California already beginning to happen.
But the melting pot did not always mean equal opportunities. And centuries later, the place where many African Americans flocked was Central Avenue.
By 1950, the California Eagle, an African-American owned newspaper, called Central Avenue the Black Belt of Los Angeles. Central Avenue was intentionally created to be an African-American enclave within the city. This uptick in population growth in Central Avenue was because of the economic opportunity that this area had, but also because of the housing covenants that limited African Americans from participating in the larger Los Angeles economy. So they focused their energies on areas where they were able to circulate the black dollar regularly.
And so that is how Central Avenue became the home to many Black LA landmarks.
Well, the 28th Street YMCA was known as the Colored YMCA because at the time, African Americans couldn't swim in public pools, and so the Colored YMCA sought to offset that by having dormitories and, of course, swimming pools and a gymnasium so that African Americans could participate in recreational fitness activities. The Lincoln Theater was also another prominent location off of Central Avenue. It was called the Apollo of the West. It had many greats perform there, but in the 1960s, the Lincoln Theater would be converted into a church and now serves as a major religious location in the City of Angels. There has to be one place mentioned regarding Central Avenue, and that would have to be the Dunbar Hotel. In its first year, actually had the national convention of the NAACP. Some of the people that stayed within the hotel would be Thurgood Marshall, W.E.B. Du Bois, the like. The Dunbar Hotel was the epicenter of the Black jazz scene here in the city, and on its bottom floor was converted into a club that had all of the greats perform from Duke Ellington and onward. Fire Station number 30 was one of two of the major African American fire stations in the city of Los Angeles. Segregated in 1924, would still be segregated all the way into 1956. Having an all-black fire station was able to create racial pride for African Americans off the Central Corridor. Now today, Fire Station number 30 exists as a museum and serves as a huge milestone and landmark for those who want to understand how African Americans have served greatly to the City of Angels.
Up next, we're off to the races with America's first sports heroes, African American jockeys.
They understood the animal. They could get the most out of the animal, which is something that modern jockeys still are working to do today.
Gallant Fox duplicates Sir Barton's feat of winning the Preakness, Kentucky Derby, and Belmont Stakes, America's Triple Crown, a truly great three-year-old.
Here at the home to Triple Crown winners Gallant Fox and Omaha, you might not expect to find Black history. But at the fabled Bel Air Stables in Bowie, Maryland, that's exactly what you'll discover.
The African American jockey is a much unheralded, much forgotten, much overlooked but a critically important piece of American thoroughbred horse racing history. So we decided that we wanted to honor that. But it was the black men, the slave men, who were the handlers of these horses and the trainers of these horses, and the individuals who knew them, understood them the best.
And that was no accident. From its earliest days, horse racing of all kinds was America's most popular sport.
Horse racing in general has gone on in this country since the 18th century. In the 18th century, it was a rich man's sport. The rich guy owned the horse, the rich guy picked who rode the horse, but anybody, regardless of whether they were slave or free, rich or poor, everybody went to the races.
So it should come as no surprise that when organized racing events like the Kentucky Derby began, black jockeys dominated the sport.
African American jockeys won something like 11 of the first 13 Kentucky Derbies.
At the International Museum of the Horse in Lexington, Kentucky, an exhibit dedicated to the black horsemen of the turf gives these unsung heroes overdue recognition.
I think Isaac Murphy is probably the most well-known African-American jockey, and he is definitely one of the highlights here.
Murphy won 3 Kentucky Derbies and is considered one of America's best jockeys of all time. He rode his horses to victory in more than 628 races with a 44% winning record, still unequaled today. Murphy's Derby record was matched by Jimmy Wingfield, who was the last African-American jockey to win a Derby. Wingfield also won 2 consecutive runs for the Roses.
These men lived primarily in the East End Lexington, downtown, and they became really wealthy in their own rights. They were really famous for that time period, and just the sports heroes of the latter 19th century.
But even before Wingfield crossed the finish line in his last Derby win, the fate of the black jockeys was in danger.
These black men were getting these very lucrative riding contracts because they were winners. The white jockeys were not. And then this jealousy began to evolve.
They were both physically run off of tracks by white jockeys, and then they were no longer being hired by the white owners of those horses. The owners feared for their horses' lives, and then they weren't going to put them at risk.
An African American has not won the Kentucky Derby since 1902. They opened a lot of doors way back when, and their history is very, very rich.
To celebrate their sports heroes, the International Museum of the Horse printed up these trading cards as a way to keep the memory of the great black jockeys alive. When we come back, we cook up a little black history with celebrity chef Carla Hall.
I would simply say soul food is a cuisine that was started by black cooks. Even though the term is relatively new, but the food itself has been around since slavery.
When Washingtonians crave some soul food, they can head over to Ben's Chili Bowl on U Street. But sometimes you don't even have to leave the house to find black history. Carla Hall will tell you it's right in your own kitchen. After 6 years on ABC's The Chew, Hall is rediscovering recipes closer to home.
When I was growing up in Nashville, I didn't call it soul food. It was just the food that we were eating.
Now with her third cookbook, Soul Food, Carla Hall is returning to her roots and the dishes she remembers from her childhood.
I spent so much time running away from soul food because going to a French cooking school, I don't see my heritage. Seeing people who were pigeonholed and expecting me to do certain food, and I ran away from that. After the National Museum of African American History and Culture opened, and I am the culinary ambassador, I realized I have so much to be proud of in my culture. And I didn't feel it before that point.
We're so lucky to have Carla Hall here to walk us through the origins of soul food, misconceptions about the cuisine, and its overall cultural significance.
Recently, Hall shared some soul food secrets at a party for her new book at Washington, D.C.'s Politics and Prose.
We get to Carla Hall, who says that her book is recipes that capture all the soulfulness of soul food, but don't make you feel like you're gonna die after.
Book lovers were treated to a soul food sampling. Hall hopes her new book will help dispel some myths about the cuisine.
I think that people think about soul food as being really heavy and fat-laden and salty, but there is all of these vegetables because Southern food is an agrarian cuisine, and people were poor, and they live off the waterways, you know, so fish and shrimp.
According to Hall, other important distinctions set soul food apart from more regional cooking.
People would say, well, what's the difference between soul food and Southern food? I eat the same food. And then you have to say black cooks. You can have the same recipe, but I think because with black cooks, generally, historically, they were eating scraps. They had to put more seasoning in their food to make it taste good. And so it's a history of seasoning our food more.
Before she began her new book, Hall toured the South in search of great recipes and cultural experiences to remind her of her journey.
I am falling in love again with my heritage that I ran away from for so long. Talk to the people from your community and connect back with that heritage because there are a lot of wonderful stories there, you know, wherever that takes you.
Carla Hall told us her book has inspired great conversations about what is soul food and what is not. And just like Americans with European ancestors, African Americans have unique backgrounds, and they each bring their own kind of soul food to the table. We hope you found some undiscovered Black history in the last half hour, and that you will want to explore more of what's in your own backyard. I'm Robin Hamilton. Thanks for watching.